The Persistence drifted in the vast emptiness of space, its once proud hull now marked with patches and dents. In the grand docking bay of Galactic Alliance Station Alpha, it looked small and weak next to the mighty warships that surrounded it. The light cruiser had served for over 50 years, ancient by Alliance standards, and everyone knew it was just waiting to be scrapped. Captain Thomas Reed stood tall as he led his team through the crowded station. His weathered face showed the marks of Earth's recent space battles, but his eyes remained sharp and focused. Behind him walked his hand-picked crew. Jane Wilson with her toolbox swinging at her side, Marcus Hill with his military posture, Lisa Cooper scanning everything with curious eyes, and Alan Green lost in thought as always. "That can't be our ship," Marcus whispered as they approached the viewing window. The Persistence hung in space like a forgotten toy, its paint faded and peeling. "It is," Thomas replied simply. He had expected this. When Earth joined the Galactic Alliance 3 months ago, humans were still seen as newcomers, untested and unproven. Giving them the worst ship in the fleet was both a test and an insult. A blue-skinned alien with 4 arms approached them. His uniform bore the marks of an Alliance liaison officer. "I am Krell," he announced without offering a greeting gesture. "I will be supervising your assignment." The way he said the last word made it clear what he thought of humans commanding any Alliance vessel. "Captain Reed," Thomas introduced himself with a firm nod. "We're ready to inspect our ship." Krell made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Inspect? The Persistence has already been inspected. It meets minimum Alliance safety standards." "Barely." The shuttle ride to the Persistence was silent and tense. When they docked and the airlock hissed open, the smell hit them first, stale air mixed with the scent of old metal and leaked fluids. "Welcome to your new home," Krell said, stepping through the airlock. "Admiral Vorsten sends his regards. Your orders are simple. Patrol the outer rim sectors 18 through 22. Report any unusual activity. Stay out of trouble." Thomas nodded. The outer rim was the emptiest, quietest region of Alliance space, perfect for keeping an embarrassing ship far from important eyes. "I'll show you to the bridge," Krell continued. "Try not to touch anything until the official handover is complete." The corridors of the Persistence were narrow and dim. Exposed wires hung from ceiling panels. The floor plates rattled under their boots. "This is worse than I expected," Lisa whispered to Alan. "It's perfect," Alan replied with a small smile. The bridge was small compared to Earth vessels of similar size. 5 worn control stations formed a half-circle around a central command chair. The view screen flickered with static every few seconds. "Your quarters are on Deck 3, Krell said. "The previous crew left in something of a hurry. You may find some of their personal items still aboard." "When was this ship last in combat?" Marcus asked, running his hand over a weapons console. "The Persistence hasn't seen combat in 15 years, Krell replied. "It was deemed unsuitable." After Krell left them to get acquainted with their new command, the 5 humans stood in a circle on the bridge. "Well, Captain," Jane asked, "what's the plan?" Thomas looked around the bridge, taking in every broken panel and flickering light. Then he smiled. "The plan is Project Phoenix, just like we discussed." The others nodded. They had been preparing for this since learning of their assignment. "They think they're punishing us," Thomas continued. "The weakest ship for the newest species, but they don't understand humans very well. They don't understand what we can do with scraps," Jane added, already examining a control panel she had partially disassembled. "Engine room first," Thomas decided. "Jane, I want a complete assessment by 800 tomorrow. Marcus, weapons inventory. Lisa, communication systems. Alan, ship's computer and sensors. I'll review the ship's history and previous mission logs." The next day, they gathered again on the bridge. Their faces were smudged with grease and dirt, but their eyes shone with excitement. "It's worse than we thought," Jane reported first. "The main engines are running at 60% efficiency at best. The power core needs a complete overhaul. Weapons are a joke, Marcus added. Standard Alliance beam weapons, but the targeting systems are from 3 generations ago. Half the torpedo tubes are sealed shut from lack of maintenance. Communications work, Lisa said, but only at short range. The long-range arrays need new receivers. And the computer core is handling so many patches and workarounds that it's using 40% of its processing power just to maintain basic functions. Alan finished. Thomas nodded, taking it all in. Then he looked at each of them. Then we have our work cut out for us. The official handover ceremony is tomorrow. After that, we have 3 weeks before our first patrol begins. That's not enough time, Marcus argued. It's enough to start, Thomas replied. Jane, I want those engines running at 80% minimum before we leave dock. I'll need parts we don't have, she said. Then get creative. This is what we trained for. The handover ceremony the next day was brief and cold. Admiral Vorston appeared via hologram, his large, ridge-covered face filling the view screen. The Alliance welcomes humanity's contribution to our fleet, he said without warmth. May the Persistence serve as a suitable introduction to our standards and protocols. His emphasis made the insult clear. After the Admiral's image faded, Krell presented Thomas with an official data chip. Your command codes and clearances, he explained. Limited to level 3 access, of course. Of course, Thomas replied calmly. I will remain aboard as your liaison and observer during your first patrol cycle, Krell added. Standard procedure for new member species. We look forward to working with you, Thomas said, keeping his face neutral. As soon as Krell left the bridge, Jane turned to Thomas. He's here to spy on us. Naturally, Thomas agreed. That's why we'll keep our most important modifications hidden until we're underway. Over the next 3 weeks, the human crew worked in shifts around the clock. They requisitioned what parts they could, salvaged others from storage, and fabricated the rest. Jane spent most of her time deep in the engine room, emerging only for brief meals before disappearing again. When Krell inquired about their activities, Thomas explained that they were simply bringing the ship up to Earth standards of safety. The liaison seemed satisfied with this explanation, especially since the humans requested no special equipment or materials. The night before their departure, Thomas found Jane in the engine room, surrounded by disassembled components. Will it work? He asked quietly. She looked up, her face streaked with grease, but her eyes bright with accomplishment. They gave us a floating coffin, she said, patting the newly modified power core. But we're turning it into something they've never seen before. She pointed to the schematics on her tablet. I've reconfigured the matter-antimatter injectors based on Earth's quantum compression theories. The Alliance engineers would never try this. They'd call it too unstable. And is it? Thomas asked. Jane grinned. Only if you don't know what you're doing. As the Persistence prepared to leave dock the next morning, Krell observed the human crew with obvious skepticism. Your patrol route has been programmed into the navigation computer, he said. Try not to get lost. Thomas settled into the command chair, feeling it adjust to his form. Crew status. Engineering ready, Jane reported from her station. Weapons, such as they are, ready, Marcus added with a slight smile. Communications online, Lisa confirmed. Navigation and sensors functioning, Alan said. Thomas nodded and looked ahead at the view screen, which now displayed a clear view of open space. Release docking clamps. Thrusters at 1/4. Take us out, nice and easy. As the Persistence pulled away from the station, Thomas allowed himself a small smile. The Alliance had given them their weakest ship as an insult. They would soon discover that was their first mistake. 1 week into their patrol mission, the Persistence cruised slowly through the empty regions of Sector 19. On the bridge, Krell watched with growing curiosity as the human crew worked in perfect harmony, despite the ship's obvious flaws. Your engines are running 5% above the efficiency levels in the ship's records, Krell noted, studying the display. How is that possible without an Alliance dock overhaul? Captain Reed glanced at Jane, who merely shrugged. Basic maintenance, Jane said. Sometimes all an old machine needs is a little care. Krell didn't look convinced, but he said nothing more. As the liaison officer left the bridge, Thomas turned to his engineer. How much have you actually improved them? Jane grinned. 15% so far. But I told the ship's computer to report only small improvements. No need to make our friends suspicious yet. Thomas nodded with approval. Good thinking. How long until the real work can begin? Tonight, Jane replied. Alan has figured out how to loop the ship's internal sensors. Krell won't see what we're doing in the lower decks. When the night cycle began, the real work started. While Krell slept in his quarters, the human crew gathered in Cargo Bay 3, the farthest room from the liaison's quarters. Status reports, Thomas said quietly. Jane went first. I've prepared the engine modifications. We'll need at least 3 hours of complete engine shutdown to install them. Too risky, Thomas replied. Krell would notice immediately. Not if we do it during the weekly maintenance cycle, Marcus suggested. We're scheduled to power down for 2 hours next cycle. We could extend it by claiming we found an issue. Thomas nodded. Good. What about weapons? Marcus displayed a schematic on his tablet. Alliance weapon systems are designed for specific tasks. Point defense arrays for small targets, main cannons for large ships, and so on. But I've been redesigning them to be adaptable. Adaptable how? Lisa asked. On Earth, we learned to make weapons that can change their function based on the target, Marcus explained. The Alliance never developed this because they prefer specialized ships working together. But since we're alone out here, we need to be able to handle anything. Thomas finished. Excellent. Lisa, communications are interesting, she said. The Alliance uses standard transmission protocols, but their actual code structure is inefficient. I've been rewriting the base code to use Earth's compression algorithms. We'll be able to send 10 times more data in the same transmission window and detect signals that Alliance ships would miss. Alan added. I've been helping Lisa with the sensor arrays. They're designed to look for specific energy signatures, but we're modifying them to detect patterns instead. Thomas looked at each of them with pride. This is exactly why Earth chose each of you for this mission. You're not just experts, you're innovators. Over the next 2 weeks, the human crew worked tirelessly to transform their ship without alerting Krell. The maintenance cycle provided their first big opportunity. When the engines powered down, Jane and her team immediately began installing the new quantum compression injectors. We need more time, Jane reported over her communicator. They were already 30 minutes past the scheduled restart. On the bridge, Thomas looked at Krell, who was growing impatient. Is there a problem, Captain? The liaison asked. Jane reports a fluctuation in the antimatter containment field. Thomas lied smoothly. Standard procedure is to check the entire system before restart. Krell's 4 eyes blinked rapidly. I should inspect this myself. By all means, Thomas offered, knowing Jane was prepared for this possibility. Engineering is all yours. When Krell arrived in engineering, Jane showed him a diagnostic screen with carefully prepared false readings. See these fluctuations? She pointed to a wavy line. If we restart with these readings, we risk a containment breach. Krell studied the screen, then the surrounding equipment. His eyes narrowed. This section looks different than standard Alliance configuration. Jane nodded calmly. We rerouted some power conduits to improve efficiency. It's within Alliance safety protocols, she added quickly. Krell seemed unconvinced but unable to identify exactly what was wrong. Finally, he agreed to allow the additional maintenance time. An hour later, the engines came back online. The ship's power levels immediately jumped, more than Jane had expected. Power output at 127% of baseline, Alan reported from the bridge. That's significant. Krell stared at the readings. Impossible. These engines cannot exceed 110% without a complete overhaul. Must be a sensor malfunction, Thomas suggested. Alan, recalibrate the power sensors. Alan pretended to make adjustments. Better now, sir. Reading 108% power. Krell seemed satisfied with this explanation, but later that night, he confronted Thomas in his ready room. Your crew is making unauthorized modifications to an Alliance vessel, Krell stated flatly. This is a violation of Protocol 87C. Thomas didn't deny it. We're making improvements, not violations. The ship still operates within Alliance safety parameters. That is not your decision to make, Krell insisted. I must report this to Admiral Forston immediately. Thomas leaned forward. Before you do that, let me show you something. He led Krell to the sensor lab, where Alan had been working on his own modifications. Alan brought up a display showing a star system they had passed yesterday. This is what the Alliance sensors recorded, Alan explained, showing a basic star map with a few planets. Then he switched to a second display. And this is what our modified sensors detected. The second display showed the same system but with significantly more detail, asteroid fields, small moons, and strange energy patterns near the third planet. What is that? Krell asked, pointing to the energy pattern. We don't know yet, Alan admitted, but the Alliance sensors missed it completely. If it's something dangerous. Krell's face showed conflict. As much as he disapproved of the humans' methods, he couldn't ignore a potential security threat. 1 week, he finally said. I will give you 1 week to prove your modifications have value. If they do not, I will report everything to the Admiral. After Krell left, Thomas gathered his crew in the mess hall. We have 1 week to convince him, he announced. Jane, I need the engines fully upgraded by then. Marcus, weapons systems too. Lisa and Alan, perfect those sensors. We need to show him something that will change his mind. Or we could just lock him in his quarters, Marcus suggested with a half-smile. Thomas shook his head. We're not here to make enemies. We're here to prove what humans can offer the Alliance. For the next week, the crew worked openly on their modifications, explaining each change to a surprisingly interested Krell. The liaison asked detailed questions and even offered suggestions based on his knowledge of Alliance technology. On the 7th day, Jane called everyone to engineering. The engine room looked completely different now. Where there had once been exposed wires and leaking pipes, there were now sleek, humming systems with pulsing blue lights. It's ready, she announced. Full quantum compression drive, based on Earth's theoretical designs. Never successfully built until now. What will it do? Krell asked. Jane smiled. It will give us 3 times the speed and twice the range of any Alliance vessel of similar size. And it's just the beginning. That night, Captain Reed found Krell on the observation deck, staring at the stars. Have you decided? Thomas asked. Krell turned to face him. What you're doing is impossible, he admitted. Our engineers have tried for centuries to solve some of these problems. Maybe you've been thinking about them wrong, Thomas suggested. Humans excel at the impossible because we refuse to accept limitations. Krell was quiet for a long moment. I will not report your modifications, he finally said, on one condition. Name it. Teach me, Krell said, his voice softer than Thomas had ever heard it. I want to understand how you think, how you see problems differently. Thomas smiled and extended his hand in the human gesture of agreement. After a moment's hesitation, Krell reached out one of his 4 hands to complete the handshake. The Persistence continued its patrol, but it was no longer the same ship that had left dock. System by system, it was becoming something new, something the Alliance had never seen before. And this was only the beginning. 3 months into their patrol mission, the Persistence had changed dramatically. The once dying ship now hummed with power. Its engines purred like a well-fed cat. The weapons systems, though still limited by their original hardware, now responded with twice their previous speed. and the sensors could detect things no Alliance ship was designed to see. Krell had become an unexpected ally. He spent hours with each crew member, learning their methods and sharing his knowledge of Alliance systems. Today, he stood beside Marcus at the weapons console, watching him adjust targeting parameters. "Your approach defies Alliance military doctrine," Krell observed. "We build separate systems for separate functions. You combine them." Marcus nodded. "On Earth, we learned that specialized systems fail when faced with unexpected situations. Adaptable systems survive." The ship's comm system suddenly blared with an urgent signal. "Captain to the bridge," Lisa's voice called out. Thomas arrived within minutes, followed by Krell and Marcus. Jane and Alan were already there with Lisa, all staring at the main view screen. "What is it?" Thomas asked. "Emergency distress call," Lisa reported. "From Research Station Epsilon. It's near the border of Vorax space." Thomas tensed. Everyone in the Alliance knew about the Vorax, a hostile species that had waged war against the Alliance for generations. Their current peace was fragile at best. "Play the message," he ordered. A distorted voice filled the bridge, broken by static. "Under attack. Unknown vessels. Shields failing. Request immediate assistance. Survivors in the central core." "When did this come in?" Thomas asked. "Just now," Lisa replied. "But the timestamp shows it was sent 6 hours ago." 6 hours? Krell's 4 eyes widened. "No Alliance communication should take that long to reach us." "It didn't come through normal channels," Lisa explained. "It was hidden inside a burst of radiation. Our modified sensors detected the pattern. Standard Alliance ships would have missed it completely." Thomas turned to Krell. "How far are we from Station Epsilon?" Krell checked the navigation console. "At maximum speed, 12 hours. Jane, can we push the engines harder?" Thomas asked. The engineer nodded. "The quantum compression drive is ready for its first full test. We could make it in 6 hours. Are there any other Alliance ships closer?" Thomas asked Krell. The liaison checked the fleet deployment charts. "The cruiser Dauntless and 2 destroyers are responding from Starbase 12. Estimated arrival, 10 hours. Thomas made his decision. "Set course for Station Epsilon. Maximum speed. Alert medical to prepare for casualties." As the Persistence changed course, Krell moved closer to Thomas. "Captain, I must advise caution. If the Vorax are involved, one small ship cannot." "We're not going to engage," Thomas interrupted. "We're going to rescue survivors. We'll be in and out before the Vorax know we're there." "Alliance protocol would dictate waiting for reinforcements," Krell noted. Thomas met his gaze steadily. "Human protocol dictates rescue. We don't leave people behind." 6 hours later, the Persistence dropped out of faster-than-light travel near Station Epsilon. The research station hung in space like a broken toy. Half of its massive ring structure was simply gone, torn away by weapons fire. The central core, where the laboratories and living quarters were located, still showed some lights, but many sections were dark. "Life signs?" Thomas asked. Alan studied his sensor readings. "Confirmed. 43 life forms in the central core, but they're fading. Atmosphere is leaking." "Vorax ships?" Marcus asked, scanning the area. 3 vessels, Alan reported, in orbit around the station's far side. Thomas turned to his crew. "We have one chance at this. The Persistence wasn't built for combat, even with our modifications. The Vorax will detect us as soon as we move closer," Krell warned. Lisa looked up from her console. "Maybe not. Our new sensors gave me an idea. We can mask our energy signature to look like background radiation. It won't fool them for long, but it might get us close enough." Thomas nodded. "Do it. Marcus, be ready with defensive systems only. Jane, keep the engines hot. We'll need to leave fast." The Persistence moved silently toward the damaged station, its energy signature disguised. When they were within 1,000 kilometers, Alan reported a change. "The Vorax ships are moving. They've detected something." How long until they identify us? Thomas asked. 2 minutes, maybe 3, Alan replied. Not enough time for standard docking, Krell said. Thomas turned to Jane. Options. The engineer thought for a moment. We could use the emergency transport system. It's not meant for this many people, but I've upgraded the buffers. Will it work through the station's shields? Thomas asked. What shields? Jane replied grimly. Those are offline, but the radiation levels are high. It'll be risky. Thomas made the call. Prepare emergency transport. Marcus, Lisa, Alan, you're with me. Krell, you have the bridge. I should accompany you, Krell insisted. No, Thomas said firmly. If something happens to us, you need to get this ship and any survivors we transport back to Alliance space. In the transporter room, the away team prepared quickly. Marcus distributed weapons, while Lisa calibrated communication devices to work in the high radiation environment. Vorax ships changing course, Krell reported over the comm. They've spotted us. Transport now, Thomas ordered. The team materialized in a dark corridor. Emergency lighting cast red shadows over twisted metal and floating debris. The air was thin, and warning sirens wailed in the distance. This way, Alan said, following his handheld sensor. Life signs are strongest in the central laboratory. They moved quickly through the damaged station, helping injured researchers along the way. Most were too weak to walk, suffering from radiation exposure and injuries. In the main laboratory, they found the remaining survivors huddled around the last functioning life support system. A tall, gray-skinned researcher approached them. Alliance rescue? He asked weakly. Yes, Thomas confirmed. We're transporting everyone out. The Vorax could return any minute. As they organized the survivors for transport, the station shook violently. What was that? Marcus asked. Lisa checked her communicator. The Persistence is under attack. 2 Vorax ships are firing on it. Krell, Thomas called over his comm. Status report. The Vorax have engaged, Krell replied, his voice steady despite the crisis. I'm implementing evasive maneuvers, but our shields cannot withstand direct hits for long. We need 5 more minutes to evacuate everyone, Thomas told him. You have 3, Krell replied. After that, I cannot guarantee this ship will still be here. The away team worked frantically, grouping survivors for emergency transport. As the last group prepared to leave, the station rocked again, harder this time. Direct hit on the station's core, Alan reported. Structural integrity failing. Everyone out now, Thomas ordered. Marcus was helping the last survivor, an injured researcher who couldn't stand, when part of the ceiling collapsed. Without hesitation, Marcus pushed the researcher clear but was struck by falling debris. Marcus, Lisa cried out. Thomas rushed to his weapons officer, who lay pinned under a metal beam. Blood flowed from a gash on his head. Go, Marcus said weakly. Get them out. Not happening, Thomas replied. Together with Alan, he lifted the beam enough for Lisa to pull Marcus free. Transport lock engage, came Jane's voice over the comm. Stand by. As the station began to break apart around them, the rescue team and the last survivors dematerialized in a shimmer of light. Back on the Persistence, the medical team rushed to treat the survivors and the injured Marcus. On the bridge, Thomas found Krell expertly maneuvering the ship away from the Vorax attackers. The 3rd Vorax vessel is moving to intercept, Ellen reported. We can't outrun all 3, Jane said from engineering. Thomas looked at the tactical display. Then he turned to Krell. Remember those modifications we weren't sure would work? It's time to find out. Krell nodded in understanding. The Alliance would never approve. The Alliance isn't here, Thomas replied. We are. Activate the shield harmonics, Thomas ordered as the Persistence shuddered from another Vorax hit. Jane, we need that power modulation now. In engineering, Jane worked frantically at her console. Ready in 5 seconds. The three Vorax ships closed in, their sleek, predatory forms visible on the view screen. Their weapons charged for another volley. Harmony sequence engaged, Jane reported. The lights on the bridge dimmed momentarily, then brightened as a new energy pattern flowed through the ship. On the weapons console, Marcus's modified systems came to life. Harmony shields at full power, Alan confirmed. The lead Vorax ship fired. A bright energy beam struck the Persistence, but instead of exploding against the shields, the energy seemed to flow around the ship like water. "It's working," Lisa exclaimed. "Shields absorbing 87% of incoming energy," Alan reported, his voice filled with surprise. "The modified emitters are redirecting the rest." Thomas turned to Krell, who stared at the readings with wide eyes. "This is impossible," Krell whispered. "Shield technology cannot absorb energy like this. It can when you tune the shield harmonics to match the frequency of the incoming weapons," Jane explained over the comm. "The Alliance never tried because your shield doctrine is about deflection, not absorption." Another Vorax blast hit them, stronger than before. "They're adjusting their weapons," Marcus warned from his medical bed. He had insisted on being moved to the bridge, where he lay on a portable cot with medical monitors attached to his chest. His head was bandaged, but his eyes were alert. "Jane, can we use the absorbed energy?" Thomas asked. "Channeling to engines now," she replied. "We'll have a burst of speed in 30 seconds." Thomas studied the tactical display. "We need a clear path. Krell, on my mark. Take us between the lid ship and its wingman." Krell nodded, his four hands moving with precision over the navigation controls. "Now," Thomas ordered. The Persistence surged forward, suddenly accelerating to speeds no Alliance ship of its size could achieve. It slipped between two Vorax vessels before they could react. "Clear path to warp speed," Krell announced. "Get us out of here," Thomas ordered. The stars stretched into lines as the Persistence jumped to faster-than-light speed, leaving the Vorax ships behind. In the sudden quiet of the bridge, the crew exchanged looks of relief and amazement. "We did it," Lisa said softly. "The survivors?" Thomas asked. "Medical reports all 43 are alive," Alan replied. "Some critical, but stable." Thomas turned to Marcus. "That was too close. Your Harmony shields saved us all." "Jane's engine modifications gave us the speed," Marcus replied. "And Krell's flying got us clear." Krell seemed surprised at the acknowledgement. "I merely followed the captain's orders." "You're part of this crew now," Thomas told him, official observer or not. Before Krell could respond, the comm system activated. The stern face of Admiral Turkin appeared on the view screen. "Captain Reed," the Admiral's deep voice filled the bridge. "The Dauntless reports you've rescued the Station Epsilon survivors. Explain your actions." Thomas straightened in his chair. "We received their distress call and responded, Admiral." "You were ordered to patrol sectors 18 through 22, the Admiral reminded him. "Station Epsilon is in Sector 25. "Yes, sir. We detected their emergency signal when no other ships could and determined immediate action was necessary." The Admiral's eyes narrowed. "The Persistence is not equipped for rescue operations, especially in Vorax territory. You risked provoking an incident." "With respect, Admiral," Thomas countered. "We saved 43 lives. The station was already under attack when we arrived." "Rendezvous with the Dauntless at coordinates 557 Mark 89, the Admiral ordered. "Transfer the survivors and prepare for inspection." After the Admiral's image faded, Krell turned to Thomas. He did not sound pleased. "No," Thomas agreed, "but we did the right thing." 12 hours later, the Persistence docked alongside the massive cruiser Dauntless. Medical teams transferred the survivors, while Thomas and Krell boarded the larger ship to meet with Admiral Turkin. The Admiral's ready room was spacious and austere. He sat behind a large desk, studying a datapad. 17, he said without looking up. "Sir," Thomas asked. You've violated 17 Alliance protocols with your modifications, Admiral Turkin stated coldly. He set down the pad and finally looked at Thomas. Then, unexpectedly, he added, and saved 43 lives that would have been lost had you followed them. Thomas remained silent, uncertain where this was heading. The lead researcher from Station Epsilon has requested to speak with you, the Admiral continued. He's waiting in the conference room. In the dauntless conference room, the gray-skinned researcher from the station stood waiting. He looked much better than during the rescue, though still weak. Captain Reed, he greeted Thomas. I am Dr. Vren, Chief Scientist of Project Horizon. Doctor, Thomas nodded. I'm glad to see you recovering. Thanks to you and your crew, Vren replied. But I fear your timely rescue may only delay a greater disaster. Vren activated a holographic display showing the strange device. This is what we were researching at Station Epsilon, he explained. A Vorax prototype weapon we recovered from a derelict scout ship. The hologram zoomed in, revealing complex internal mechanisms. We discovered its purpose just before the attack. Vren continued. It's designed to collapse subspace. Admiral Turkin, who had entered silently, stepped forward. Collapse subspace. Are you certain? Completely, Vren confirmed. If deployed, these weapons could render vast regions of space impassable. Planets would be cut off from each other. The Alliance would be fragmented. The Vorax attacked to recover the prototype, Thomas realized. Yes, Vren nodded. But our data indicates they have already built more. We detected energy signatures consistent with these weapons at 3 locations deep in Vorax space. The Admiral's face darkened. How long before they can deploy them? Weeks, Vren replied. Perhaps days. Admiral Turkin turned away, his posture rigid. I must alert High Command immediately. Captain Reed, Officer Krell, remain here. After the Admiral left, Vren studied Thomas with curious eyes. I've heard about your ship, the scientist said. How you've modified it beyond Alliance specifications. Word travels fast, Thomas remarked. Among scientists, yes, Vren smiled slightly. Is it true your shields can absorb energy rather than deflect it? Thomas glanced at Krell, who nodded slightly. Yes, Thomas confirmed, along with other modifications. Vren leaned closer. Then you may be our only hope. 2 hours later, Thomas found himself in a heated debate with Admiral Turkin and the captains of 6 other Alliance vessels. High Command has ordered all ships to defensive positions around core Alliance worlds, the Admiral announced. We will establish a containment perimeter, leaving the outer colonies undefended, Thomas pointed out. We cannot protect everything, Captain Lorith of the Dauntless argued. Strategic withdrawal is our only option until we develop countermeasures. That could take years, Thomas countered. By then, the Vorax will have cut off half the Alliance. What do you propose instead? Admiral Turkin asked, his tone making clear he expected no reasonable answer. Thomas activated the holographic display, showing a map of Vorax space. A counteroffensive, he said simply. Target the weapon facilities before they can deploy. The room erupted in protests. Impossible. Suicide mission. The Vorax fleet would destroy any approaching force. Admiral Turkin raised a hand for silence. One ship against the Vorax fleet. Even with your modifications, it would be suicide. Thomas displayed a simulation based on Alan's calculations. The Persistence isn't just modified, it's evolved. And it's the only ship in the fleet the Vorax won't recognize. We can slip past their defenses, reach the weapon facilities, and neutralize them. The room fell silent as the simulation played out, showing the Persistence evading Vorax detection systems. This is based on what? Captain Lorith asked skeptically. Our encounter with the Vorax ships, Thomas explained. We analyzed their sensor patterns, weapon frequencies, and shield harmonics. The Persistence can be tuned to slip through their detection grid. Krell stepped forward. I have witnessed these humans' capabilities firsthand, Admiral. What seems impossible to us is methodology to them. Admiral Turkin studied the simulation again. And if you're detected? Thomas met his gaze steadily. Then we fail, and your defensive strategy proceeds as planned. You lose nothing by letting us try. Later, in his temporary quarters aboard the Dauntless, Thomas received a message from the Admiral. Permission granted. Limited resources will be provided. Success unlikely but attempt authorized. When Thomas returned to the Persistence, he found his crew waiting on the bridge. Well? Jane asked. We're going in, Thomas announced. One ship against the Vorax. Instead of fear, he saw determination in their eyes. What exactly have we turned this ship into? Krell asked, now more curious than condemning. Something the Alliance would never build, Jane answered with a slight smile. A Requiem. Thomas looked around at his crew, at Jane with her engineering genius, at Marcus still recovering but ready to fight, at Lisa with her steady confidence, at Alan with his brilliant mind, and at Krell, once an observer, but now truly one of them. The Persistence was supposed to be the weakest ship in the fleet, Thomas said. Instead, it's become our greatest hope. The Persistence moved silently through Vorax space, its energy signature disguised to mimic cosmic background radiation. On the bridge, the crew worked with quiet efficiency, each person aware of the stakes. 3 days had passed since they left Alliance territory. 3 days of careful navigation through sensor nets and patrol routes. 3 tense, dangerous days. Status? Thomas asked, his voice low despite the fact that no one could hear them in the vacuum of space. Still undetected, Lisa reported from communications. Their patrol ships have passed within 5,000 kilometers twice without changing course. Our modifications are working better than expected, Alan added from the science station. At this rate, we'll reach the primary weapon facility in 6 hours. Jane's voice came over the comm from engineering. Captain, I need you down here. There's something you should see. In engineering, Jane stood beside a holographic display of the ship's systems. The image rotated slowly, showing new connections and pathways that hadn't existed when they started their journey. What am I looking at? Thomas asked. Evolution, Jane replied. The quantum harmonics we installed are adapting. They're creating new pathways, new connections. Is it dangerous? Jane shook her head. Not dangerous, but unexpected. The ship is becoming more than the sum of its modifications. It's becoming something new. Can you control it? For now, Jane said. But I think, she hesitated. I think we need to let it happen. Thomas studied her face. You've been planning this. It wasn't a question, but Jane nodded anyway. Since we first received this assignment, I saw the potential in this old ship. The Alliance considered it obsolete, but that meant there were fewer restrictions, fewer safety protocols locking down its systems. What exactly will it become? Thomas asked. Jane met his eyes. A perfect weapon. One use, one purpose. A final requiem for our enemies. Thomas understood. And the cost? The ship, Jane said simply. Maybe more. Back on the bridge, Thomas found Krell studying sensor readings with Alan. The alien looked up as Thomas entered. We've detected the weapon facility, Krell reported. It's heavily defended. 12 Vorax warships and a planetary defense grid. Show me, Thomas ordered. The main view screen displayed an asteroid belt surrounding a small planetoid. The Vorax had built their facility inside the largest asteroid, using the others for camouflage and protection. Their defenses are too strong for a direct approach, Marcus observed from the weapons station. He had recovered enough to return to duty, though he still moved carefully. Even with our modifications, we can't fight through that. We won't have to, Thomas replied. Jane has been working on something. He turned to the rest of the crew. I need everyone in the conference room. Now. In the small conference room adjacent to the bridge, Thomas explained Jane's discovery and her plan. The faces around the table grew solemn as they understood what it would mean. It's a one-way mission, Lisa said quietly. Not necessarily, Jane countered. If we time it perfectly, we might be able to get to the escape pods before the final sequence completes. Might, Marcus repeated. The odds are low, Jane admitted. But the plan will work. The Vorax weapon will be neutralized, and their entire program disrupted. Krell had remained silent, his 4 eyes fixed on the table. Now he looked up. Now I understand, he said quietly. You never built this ship to return. Thomas didn't confirm or deny it. This is a volunteer mission. I won't order anyone to stay. The Dauntless is waiting at the rendezvous point. Anyone who wants to leave can take the shuttle. No one moved. We started this together, Marcus said. We finish it together. One by one, they nodded in agreement. Very well, Thomas said. Let's begin the final modifications. For the next 5 hours, the crew worked to prepare the ship. Jane led the process, reconfiguring systems and programming the final sequence. The Persistence would become more than just a delivery system. It would become the weapon itself. As they neared the facility, Thomas looked around the bridge at his crew, at the people who had become his family over these past months. They had taken the worst ship in the fleet and transformed it into something remarkable. And now, they would make the ultimate sacrifice. Approaching optimal position, Alan announced. Thomas nodded. Begin approach sequence. The Persistence moved forward, still cloaked from Vorax sensors. They glided through the asteroid belt, avoiding debris with precise maneuvers. They've detected something, Lisa suddenly reported. Not us specifically, but they're scanning this sector more intensively. Time to target, Thomas asked. 4 minutes, Krell replied from navigation. Maintain course, Thomas ordered. Jane, status. Final sequence ready, she reported from engineering. I set the triggers. Once we're in position, the process will be irreversible. The Persistence continued its approach, drawing closer to the massive asteroid that housed the Vorax weapon facility. They were less than 2 minutes away when everything changed. Multiple ships moving to intercept. Marcus called out. They'd spotted us. The view screen showed 3 Vorax vessels breaking formation, turning toward the Persistence with weapons charging. They're hailing us, Lisa reported, surprise in her voice. Open a channel, Thomas ordered. The image of a Vorax commander appeared on screen. The alien's reptilian features were set in a snarl. Alliance vessel, the commander hissed. You have entered Vorax space illegally. Surrender immediately or be destroyed. Thomas looked at his crew, then back at the Vorax. I'm afraid we can't do that. He signaled Lisa to cut the transmission. They're locking weapons, Marcus reported. Jane, we need the final sequence now, Thomas ordered over the comm. We're not in optimal position, she protested. It's now or never, Thomas replied. Vorax ships firing, Marcus shouted. Energy beams struck the Persistence, but instead of causing damage, the modified shields absorbed the energy, glowing brighter with each hit. Final sequence initiated, Jane announced. The ship is resonating. The lights on the bridge changed from standard white to a deep, pulsing blue. The deck plates hummed beneath their feet as the ship's systems harmonized. What are you doing? The Vorax commander demanded, his transmission forcing its way onto their view screen. Thomas smiled slightly. The weakest ship in the fleet becomes its strongest weapon. The Vorax ships fired again, more desperately now. The Persistence absorbed every hit, growing stronger each time. 1 minute to completion, Jane reported. Escape pods are ready, but we need to launch now if we're going. Thomas looked around at his crew. No one moved toward the escape routes. The Alliance needs to know if this works, Thomas said. Krell, take the shuttle. Bring them the data. Krell shook his head, all 4 of his hands working steadily at his console. My place is here, Captain, with my crew. As the Persistence reached the weapon facility, Jane's voice came over the comm one last time. 30 seconds. The ship has reached harmony. The entire vessel now glowed with absorbed energy, every system perfectly aligned with the others. The Vorax ships continued to fire, not realizing they were only making the Persistence stronger. 10 seconds. Jane counted down. Thomas stood from his command chair. It's been an honor serving with all of you. 5 seconds. The crew joined Thomas, standing together as the ship prepared for its final purpose. The Persistence, Thomas said softly, a fitting name after all. The ship reached the heart of the Vorax facility and initiated its final sequence, the controlled subspace inversion, the very principle the Vorax weapon was based on, but refined and perfected by human ingenuity. In its final moments, the Persistence didn't just destroy the Vorax weapon. It created a subspace beacon that rendered their entire weapons program useless. The frequency of the beacon would disrupt the precise conditions needed for their technology to function. The light grew blinding, and then silence. 6 months later, Admiral Turkin stood before the newly constructed memorial at Alliance headquarters. The monument depicted not just the crew of the Persistence, but the ship itself. Beside the memorial stood a new class of vessels incorporating human design principles, named Phoenix Class. An aide approached the admiral. "Sir, the Vorax delegation has arrived for the peace talks." Turkin nodded. "Tell them I'll be there shortly." As the aide left, Turkin looked back at the memorial, reading the inscription. "They transformed our weakest ship into our greatest triumph." The admiral touched the cold stone. "No," he said quietly, echoing words reported from the Persistence's final transmission. "They transformed our thinking. The ship was just the beginning." The Phoenix-class vessel in the dock powered up its engines, the blue glow of its quantum harmonics casting light across the memorial. The weakest ship had become the strongest example, and the legacy of the Persistence would guide the Alliance into a new era. The end.
The large silver spaceship hung in the sky above New York City. It had been there for 3 days now. People stood in streets looking up with open mouths. Some were scared, others were excited. But everyone knew that the world had changed forever. Captain James Wilson stood on the roof of the United Nations building. He adjusted his blue military uniform and took a deep breath. As the head of the United Earth Defense Force's first contact team, he had trained for this moment for years. But no training could fully prepare anyone for meeting aliens. "They're landing, sir," said Lieutenant Parker, pointing to the bottom of the ship. Wilson nodded and watched as a small craft separated from the main ship and descended toward the special landing pad that had been built in the plaza. His earpiece crackled. "Remember, Captain," said General Hayes from Command Headquarters, "observe and report. Show them respect but protect Earth's interests. We're counting on you." "Understood, sir," Wilson replied, his voice steady despite the butterflies in his stomach. The landing craft touched down without a sound. It was smooth and oval-shaped, with no visible engines or windows. A door appeared in its side, sliding open to reveal a ramp. Wilson stepped forward with 5 other representatives who had been chosen for this historic meeting. 3 tall figures walked down the ramp. They had blue-gray skin that seemed to shimmer in the sunlight. Their eyes were large and purple, set in faces that looked almost human but not quite. They wore what appeared to be armor, though it moved like cloth. The tallest alien stepped forward. "I am Ambassador Trell of the Valeri Confederation," he said in perfect English. Their translation technology had obviously been studying Earth's broadcasts. "We come in peace and wish to establish relations with your world." Wilson stepped forward. "I am Captain James Wilson of the United Earth Defense Force. On behalf of humanity, I welcome you to Earth." Ambassador Trell nodded. "This is my military advisor, Commander Korak," he said, gesturing to a stockier alien with dark markings on his face. "And our science officer, Mira." Korak looked at Wilson with what seemed like amusement. His eyes moved over Wilson's uniform, lingering on the sidearm at his hip. "You still carry physical weapons?" Korak asked, his voice containing a note of surprise. Wilson nodded. Yes, this is standard for military personnel. Korak made a sound that might have been a laugh. He turned and said something to Trell in their language. The following days were filled with meetings and discussions. The Volari seemed peaceful enough. They talked about trade, cultural exchange, and sharing of some technologies. But whenever military matters came up, Korak showed the same dismissive attitude. 1 week after first contact, Wilson was invited aboard the Volari mothership for a tour. He brought along Major Diana Foster, his weapons specialist, and Dr. Mark Thompson, Earth's leading physicist. The inside of the ship was incredible. Corridors seemed to be made of flowing metal that changed color as they walked. Rooms appeared and disappeared as needed. The Volari were clearly hundreds of years ahead of humans in technology. "And this," said Trell proudly as they entered a large room, "is our defensive systems center." The room was filled with holographic displays showing the ship and its systems. Korak stood near a control panel watching the humans with those same amused eyes. "Perhaps," Korak said, "you would like to see some of our weapons technology, since your people seem so interested in such things." Wilson nodded. "We would appreciate that, yes." Korak pressed a few symbols on the panel. A section of the wall disappeared, revealing a window that looked out onto a large chamber. Inside were various objects, furniture, metal plates, and what looked like targets. "Observe," Korak said. He spoke a command, and a small drone flew into the chamber. It hovered and then fired a beam of blue light at one of the metal plates. The plate didn't just melt, it completely disappeared. "Molecular disintegration," Korak explained. "The target's atomic bonds are broken instantly. No debris, no radiation, no mess." Dr. Thompson's eyes widened. "Impressive," he said quietly. Korak seemed pleased by their reaction. "And now our defensive technology." He pressed another symbol and a force field appeared around one of the targets. "Our shields operate on multiple frequencies simultaneously. Nothing can penetrate them. Energy weapons are absorbed and physical objects are repelled." To demonstrate, he sent another drone to fire at the shielded target. The blue beam hit the shield and dissipated harmlessly. "What about kinetic weapons?" Major Foster asked. "Like our bullets or missiles?" Korak made that laughing sound again. "Such primitive weapons would be even less effective." He spoke another command, and the drone fired a small metal projectile at high speed toward the shield. The projectile hit the shield and bounced off as if it had hit a solid wall. "You see," Korak said, "your weapons technology is, how do you say it, obsolete. We moved beyond physical projectiles centuries ago." Wilson noticed something, though. The shield had flickered slightly when the projectile hit it, just for a split second. He caught Major Foster's eye, and he could tell she had seen it too. "Would you like to show us your weapons now, Captain?" Korak asked, his tone making it clear what he thought of Earth's technology. "Of course," Wilson said evenly. "We've arranged a demonstration at our military base tomorrow if you'd care to attend." Korak nodded. "We look forward to it." The next day, at a remote military testing ground, Wilson led the Volari delegation past various Earth weapons. They saw tanks, fighter jets, and missile systems. With each display, Korak and the other Volari seemed less impressed. "And these are your most advanced weapons?" Korak asked, as they watched a demonstration of a new laser-guided missile. "Some of them," Wilson replied carefully. "We have others that are classified." Korak made a dismissive gesture. "There is nothing in your arsenal that would concern us. Your weapons are based on chemical explosions and physical impacts. They are, what is your word? Crude." Wilson kept his face neutral, but he noticed something important. Throughout the tour, he had observed that the Volari wore no physical armor. They relied entirely on their energy shields, and those shields seemed to be calibrated primarily against energy weapons like their own. Later, back at command headquarters, Wilson met with General Hayes and his team. "They're overconfident," Wilson reported. "They've evolved beyond physical weapons and defenses. Their shields are designed to stop energy attacks like their own weapons, but they seem less effective against simple kinetic impacts. You think their shields have a weakness? General Hayes asked. I think they've forgotten the basics, Wilson said. They've advanced so far that they've left themselves vulnerable to simpler approaches. Their shields flickered when hit by their demonstration projectile. It was small and fired at a predictable speed. What would happen if we hit them with something bigger, or something moving at a different velocity than they're used to? Like a bullet? Major Foster suggested. Or a tank shell? Wilson nodded. They laughed at our primitive weapons, but they might be our best chance if things go bad. Let's hope it doesn't come to that, General Hayes said. But start working up some options. I don't like how dismissive they are of us. People who underestimate others often have bad intentions. Wilson nodded. As he left the meeting, he couldn't shake the feeling that despite the Valari's friendly words, trouble was coming. And when it did, humanity's primitive weapons might just wipe the smug looks off their alien faces. He just hoped they wouldn't have to find out who was right. 6 months had passed since the Valari arrived on Earth. What began as a hopeful first contact had slowly turned into something less friendly. Captain James Wilson sat in his office at the United Earth Defense Force headquarters, reading reports from around the world. None of them were good. The Valari had established bases in 12 locations across the planet. They called them cultural exchange centers, but Wilson had his doubts. A knock came at his door. "Enter," Wilson said, looking up from his tablet. Major Diana Foster walked in. Her face was serious. "You need to see this, sir," she said, handing him a new tablet. Wilson took it and studied the screen. It showed satellite images of the Valari base in Brazil. Large machines were digging into the ground. "When were these taken?" Wilson asked. "This morning," Foster replied. "They're extracting rare minerals without permission from the Brazilian government." Wilson frowned. This wasn't the first time. In the past month, the Valari had begun taking Earth resources without asking. When questioned, they simply said it was part of the mutual benefits of their presence on Earth. "Have you shown this to General Hayes?" Wilson asked. "Yes, sir. He wants you to bring it up at today's meeting with Ambassador Trell." Wilson nodded. "I'll handle it." 2 hours later, Wilson sat at a large table in the UN building. Across from him were Ambassador Trell and Commander Korak. Several human officials from different countries were also present. "We've discovered your mining operation in Brazil," Wilson said, placing the images on the table. "The Brazilian government never approved this." Korak looked at the images with bored eyes. "We need these minerals," he said simply. "Then you need to ask permission and offer fair payment," said the Brazilian representative. Trell waved his hand. "We are providing your world with many benefits. Our presence here brings you advanced knowledge. The minerals are small compensation." "That's not how things work on Earth," Wilson said firmly. "You can't just take what you want." Korak's purple eyes fixed on Wilson. "Your world has abundant resources that you waste. We are simply being efficient. Those resources belong to the people of Earth," Wilson insisted. Korak stood up suddenly. "You should be grateful," he said, his voice cold. "Many species would be conquered outright. We offer partnership." The room fell silent. It was the first time any of the Valari had mentioned conquest. After the meeting, Wilson walked with Dr. Anna Miller, the lead scientist assigned to study Valari technology. "They're becoming more aggressive," Wilson said. "I don't like it." Dr. Miller nodded. "I've been studying the data from their weapons demonstration. I think I found something interesting." They entered her lab, where various screens displayed test results and simulations. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a video of the Valari shield test. "Watch carefully when the projectile hits the shield." Wilson watched as the recording played in slow motion. The shield flickered slightly at the point of impact. "Their shields are energy-based," Dr. Miller explained. "They're designed to stop energy weapons and high-velocity objects, but they tune the shields to specific threat levels." "Meaning what?" Wilson asked. "Meaning they might be vulnerable to certain kinds of physical attacks," she said, "especially ones they don't expect or haven't prepared for." Wilson thought about this. Can we test your theory? Dr. Miller smiled. I've already started. We've been firing different projectiles at a sample of their shield technology. She showed him another screen. It displayed test results of various weapons fired at a small shield generator the Valari had given them as a gift. Most modern weapons don't work, she said. The fast bullets from our newest guns get stopped, but look at this. She played a video of an old revolver firing at the shield. The bullet, slower and heavier than modern ammunition, passed through the shield at half speed but made it through. They've forgotten about simple physics, Dr. Miller said. Their shields are tuned for high-energy impacts. Slower, heavier objects still have enough mass to be dangerous but don't trigger the shield's full strength. Wilson stared at the screen. Keep this quiet, he ordered. And keep testing. Find out exactly what works and what doesn't. Over the next few weeks, tensions continued to rise. The Valari established more mining operations. When governments protested, the aliens simply ignored them. Then came the incident that changed everything. Wilson was called to an emergency meeting at 3 a.m. When he arrived, General Hayes and the Joint Chiefs of Staff were already there, their faces grim. What happened? Wilson asked. General Hayes pointed to the main screen. It showed a satellite view of the Pacific Ocean. A small dot was missing. The Japanese weather satellite, Hayes explained. The Valari destroyed it an hour ago. Wilson zaned up. Blood ran cold. Why? They claim it was spying on one of their ships, said Admiral Lee. It wasn't. It was a civilian weather satellite. They're testing us, Wilson said, seeing how we'll respond. The room was silent for a moment. We need to show strength, General Hayes finally said. The President has called an emergency meeting of the United Earth Council. They're voting on issuing an ultimatum to the Valari. 3 days later, Wilson found himself once again preparing to board a Valari ship. But this time his mission wasn't friendly. In his hand was an official document from the United Earth Council. Be careful up there, Dr. Miller told him before he left. I don't trust them, especially Korak. Wilson nodded. Neither do I. He had a small pistol hidden under his jacket. Not his standard military sidearm, but an old model revolver with heavy bullets. The kind Dr. Miller had discovered could penetrate Valari shields. The Valari shuttle took Wilson up to their mothership. He was escorted to a meeting room where Ambassador Trell and Commander Korak waited. Captain Wilson, Trell said, his voice not as friendly as it once was. What brings you here today? Wilson placed the document on the table. An ultimatum from the United Earth Council. You will stop taking our resources without permission. You will respect our sovereignty. And you will pay for the satellite you destroyed. Korak picked up the document and looked at it. Then he laughed and dropped it back on the table. Or what? He asked. What will you do with your primitive weapons and technology? We will defend ourselves, Wilson said firmly. Korak leaned forward. Let me explain something to you, Captain. We have been patient with your species, but our patience has limits. So does ours, Wilson replied. Perhaps, Korak said, his voice suddenly dangerous. We should make an example, to show your people the true power of the Valari. Wilson felt a chill run down his spine. What do you mean? A small demonstration, Korak said. Perhaps one of your cities. Nothing too large. Madrid might be suitable. Wilson stood up quickly. That would be an act of war. It would be a lesson, Korak corrected. One your primitive species needs to learn. Wilson turned to leave. I need to report this threat to Earth immediately. I think not, Korak said. 2 Valari guards moved to block the door. You will remain here while we decide how to respond to this ultimatum. Wilson realized he was being detained. His hand moved slowly toward his hidden weapon. If the Valari were planning to attack Earth, he needed to warn everyone. And he was beginning to think that Dr. Miller's discovery about their shields might be humanity's only hope. Captain James Wilson stood very still as the 2 Valari guards blocked his way to the door. His hand rested near his hidden revolver, but he didn't draw it yet. He needed to think carefully. "Commander Korak," Wilson said, keeping his voice calm, "detaining an official representative is against all diplomatic rules." Korak made that now familiar sound that passed for laughter among the Valari. "Rules? You speak of rules while threatening us with your ultimatum?" "It's not a threat," Wilson replied. "It's a request for respect." Ambassador Trell stepped forward. "Perhaps we should all calm down. Captain Wilson, please take a seat. We can discuss this matter further." Wilson didn't move. "I need to report. Back to Earth. Now." "After we finish our discussion," Korak insisted. The guards moved closer. Wilson quickly assessed his situation. The room had one main door, currently blocked by the guards. There was another smaller door that likely led to another part of the ship. The meeting table stood between him and the aliens. If he had to fight, he would be outnumbered. "Very well," Wilson said, pretending to give in. "Let's talk more." He slowly moved back toward the table, his mind racing. As he passed by a chair, he suddenly grabbed it and threw it at the nearest guard. The guard stumbled back, surprised by the primitive physical attack. Wilson used that moment to pull out his revolver. The Valari in the room froze, looking at the weapon with confusion rather than fear. They had never seen an old Earth gun before. "What is that primitive thing?" Korak asked, sounding genuinely puzzled. "Something old," Wilson replied. "Something you forgot about." He aimed at the wall near the guards and fired. The loud bang of the revolver shocked the Valari, who were used to the silent energy weapons of their own culture. The bullet hit the wall, leaving a small hole. The guards looked at it in surprise. Then they activated their personal shields, shimmering energy fields that surrounded their bodies. "Your primitive weapon cannot harm us." "Through our shields," Korak said, starting to sound amused again. "Surrender now." Wilson didn't answer. Instead, he aimed directly at one of the guards and fired again. What happened next changed everything. The bullet passed through the guard's shield as if it wasn't there. The guard fell to the ground, wounded. Everyone in the room, human and alien, stared in shock. "Impossible," Korak shouted. Wilson didn't waste time explaining. He fired at the second guard, who also fell. Then he aimed the gun at Korak. "The shield frequency," Wilson said. "You never calibrated it for slow-moving projectiles, did you? You forgot about simple bullets because they seemed too primitive to be a threat." Korak's face showed a mix of anger and fear. "This is an outrage, an unprovoked attack." "You just threatened to destroy Madrid," Wilson reminded him. "And you're holding me prisoner. I'd say that provoked me plenty." Ambassador Trell raised his hands. "Captain, please, this is all a misunderstanding." "No," Wilson said firmly. "It's very clear. You came to Earth thinking we were primitive and weak. You took what you wanted, and when we stood up for ourselves, you threatened us." He kept his gun aimed at Korak while moving toward the smaller door. "I'm leaving now. I need to warn Earth about your plans." "You'll never escape the ship," Korak warned. "Watch me," Wilson replied. He backed through the small door which led to a corridor. Once through, he shut the door and used his gun to shoot the control panel beside it. Sparks flew, and the door locked shut. Alarms began to sound throughout the ship. Wilson ran down the corridor, trying to remember the layout from his previous visits. He needed to find an escape pod or shuttle. 2 more Valari appeared around a corner. They raised their energy weapons, but Wilson fired first. His bullets went straight through their shields, and they fell. "Security breach in Section 4. A voice announced over the ship's communication system. "Human intruder armed with kinetic weapons." Wilson smiled grimly. They were finally calling his revolver what it was. A kinetic weapon. Not primitive, not obsolete, just different from what they had expected. He rounded another corner and found what he was looking for. A small shuttle bay. 2 small Valari craft sat ready for use, but 3 guards stood between Wilson and the shuttles. "Stop right there, human," one of them ordered. Wilson took cover behind a storage container as they fired their energy weapons. The container melted, where their beams hit it. Wilson popped up and fired back, hitting one guard. The other 2 activated stronger shields. These ones glowed brighter than the personal shields he'd seen before. He fired at them. But this time, the bullets slowed down more before breaking through. These shields were partially effective, just not completely. One guard was hit in the leg, while the other avoided the shot. The remaining guard fired again, nearly hitting Wilson. He needed to end this quickly. Looking around, he spotted a control panel on the wall. He aimed carefully and shot it. The panel exploded in sparks and the lights in the shuttle bay flickered. The guard was distracted for just a moment, but that was all Wilson needed. He fired one more shot and the guard went down. Breathing hard, Wilson ran to the nearest shuttle. Thankfully, the Valeri controls were intuitive, designed to be used by any species. He had received basic training on operating their smaller vessels during the early days of cultural exchange. The shuttle came to life under his hands. The bay doors were closed, but Wilson found the weapon controls. He fired the shuttle's energy beam at the doors, cutting a hole large enough to fly through. As he guided the shuttle out of the Valeri mothership, he could see other ships beginning to pursue him. But the small shuttle was fast, and he pushed it to full speed toward Earth. "This is Captain Wilson to Earth Defense Command," he said into the communication system. "Emergency situation. The Valeri are hostile and planning an attack. I repeat, the Valeri are planning an attack." He looked back at the mothership growing smaller behind him. "But I've discovered something important. Their shields don't stop conventional bullets, especially from older weapons. They're vulnerable to our primitive technology." "Captain, this is General Hayes," came the reply. "Return to base immediately. We need all the information you have." "On my way, sir," Wilson replied. "But you should know, I fired the first shots. I had to fight my way out. They'll consider this an act of war." There was a brief silence. Then Hayes said, "Understood, Captain. You did what you had to do." As Wilson piloted the shuttle toward Earth, he could already see Valeri ships changing position above the planet. The mothership was turning, moving, into what looked like an attack formation. "And sir," Wilson added, "tell Dr. Miller she was right. Our old weapons work against their shields. That might be our only advantage in what's coming." "War," General Hayes said grimly. "Yes, sir," Wilson agreed. "War." Behind him, the Valeri ships began to move. The aliens who had laughed at humanity's primitive weapons were about to discover just how effective those weapons could be. The war began with fire raining from the sky. 3 hours after Captain Wilson returned to Earth, the Valeri ships moved into attack position. Their energy weapons lit up the night sky as they fired at military bases around the world. Buildings exploded into dust. Runways melted. Modern fighter jets turned to ash before they could even take off. In the underground command center of the United Earth Defense Force, General Hayes watched the destruction on multiple screens. "Status report," he demanded. "We've lost bases in Germany, Japan, and Egypt," an officer reported. "The Valeri are targeting our air defenses first." Captain Wilson stood nearby, watching grimly. He had barely made it back to Earth before the attack began. "They want to take out our advanced weapons," Wilson said. "They still think those are the only threat." "Then they're still underestimating us," General Hayes replied. He turned to his communications officer. "Send the order. Operation Throwback is now active." All around the world, hidden bunkers opened. Inside were weapons that most military leaders had considered outdated years ago. Old tanks, artillery, even World War II-era machine guns. Weapons that had been kept as museum pieces or for training. Now they would serve again. Dr. Anna Miller rushed into the command center carrying a tablet. "Captain Wilson was right," she said breathlessly. "We've analyzed his footage from the Valeri ship. Their shields can't stop slower kinetic weapons effectively, but we've made improvements." She showed them diagrams of new ammunition. "We've modified bullets to be even more effective against their shields. Lower velocity, higher mass. We're sending the specifications to all manufacturing centers now." General Hayes nodded. "Good work, Doctor. How quickly can we produce enough?" "We've already started. The design is simple enough that even small factories can make them." On another screen, they could see Valeri ships entering Earth's atmosphere. The ships were heading toward major cities. They're moving in for ground attacks, Wilson said. They think they've disabled our defenses. Colonel Reed's forces are in position, an officer reported. General Hayes nodded. Tell him to proceed. Near the coast of California, Valeri landing craft descended toward what they thought was an undefended beach. Their scans showed no active defense systems or energy signatures. To them, the area appeared abandoned. What they didn't detect were the old diesel-powered submarines hiding underwater just offshore. These submarines had been outdated for years, replaced by nuclear vessels. But their old engines didn't emit the energy signatures that Valeri sensors were designed to detect. Colonel Thomas Reed stood on the bridge of the USS Grayback, a submarine recommissioned for this very purpose. All tubes loaded with modified torpedoes, his weapons officer reported. Fire when they're in range, Reed ordered. As the Valeri ships lowered toward the beach, the submarines launched their torpedoes. The old weapons, modified with Dr. Miller's specifications, sped through the water. The Valeri detected them too late. Their shields, designed to stop energy, weapons and high-velocity projectiles, failed against the slower but massive torpedoes. Explosions rocked the alien ships, sending several crashing into the ocean. Similar scenes played out around the world. In Europe, old artillery hidden in forests fired at Valeri ships. In Asia, tanks thought too old for modern warfare emerged from hiding places to engage alien ground forces. The Valeri were confused and shocked. Their superior technology was being defeated by weapons they had dismissed as primitive. Back at TU Command Center, reports of victories began to come in. Colonel Reed reports successful engagement off the California coast. 5 Valeri landing craft destroyed, an officer announced. Tank divisions in Ukraine have engaged and destroyed Valeri. Ground forces, reported another. Wilson allowed himself a small smile. They weren't ready for this. No, General Hayes agreed. But they'll adapt. We need to press our advantage while we still have it. Dr. Miller was working furiously at a computer. The Valeri will try to recalibrate their shields to stop our kinetic weapons. We need to stay ahead of them. How? Wilson asked. By being unpredictable, she replied. We need to keep changing our approach. Different speeds, different masses, different attack vectors. General Hayes nodded. We've held them off for now, but they still have the advantage in space. We need to take the fight to them. I have an idea about that, Wilson said. For 3 days, the battle raged across Earth. The Valeri continued their attacks, but they met resistance at every turn. Human forces used weapons and tactics that confused the aliens. Old propeller planes approached from low altitudes, hidden from advanced sensors designed to detect jet engines. Mechanical weapons without electronic components couldn't be disabled by Valeri jamming signals. Supreme Admiral Vex, commander of the Valeri fleet, was furious. He had expected an easy victory. Instead, his forces were suffering heavy losses. How is this possible? He demanded of his officers aboard the Valeri flagship. They are using antiques against our advanced technology. Their weapons are unexpected, one officer admitted. Our shields were not configured for such primitive attacks. Then reconfigure them, Vex shouted. I want all ships to update their shield frequencies immediately. We are trying, Supreme Admiral, another officer said. But they keep changing their weapons. When we adjust for one type, they switch to another. Vex slammed his fist on a control panel. These humans are more resourceful than we anticipated. On Earth, Wilson was briefing a group of pilots. These weren't modern fighter pilots, but crop dusters, stunt flyers, and hobbyists who flew old planes that used minimal electronics. Your planes won't be detected by their sensors, Wilson explained. You'll deliver these specially designed bombs directly to their ships when they come into the atmosphere. A woman raised her hand. Won't their weapons shoot us down? Their weapons are designed to track modern aircraft, Wilson replied. Your old planes are essentially invisible to them. By the time they see you visually, you'll have already dropped your payload. All across Earth, similar briefings were happening. Regular citizens with hunting rifles were being taught how their simple weapons could harm the aliens. Car mechanics were modifying vehicles into weapons carriers. Earth was mobilizing in ways the Valari had never imagined. In a secure facility, Dr. Miller and her team worked on the next phase of the plan. "The cargo ships are ready," she told Wilson and General Hayes. "We've stripped them of all electronics and installed manually operated weapon systems." "Good," Hayes said. "When can they launch?" "Tomorrow," Miller replied. "We've equipped them with modified nuclear warheads that should penetrate the Valari mothership's shields." "What about the crews?" Wilson asked. "They're all volunteers," Hayes said solemnly. "They understand the risk." Wilson nodded. Earth was fighting for its survival, and sacrifices would have to be made. The next day, 12 cargo ships lifted off from various locations around the world. They had been modified to reach space using old rocket technology. No computers, no advanced guidance systems, just brave pilots making manual calculations. As they approached the Valari fleet in orbit, the alien ships initially ignored them. Their sensors registered the cargo ships as debris or primitive vehicles of no threat. By the time they realized their mistake, it was too late. The cargo ships deployed their weapons, simple nuclear warheads modified to travel at unusual speeds that the Valari shields weren't calibrated for. 3 of them struck the flagship directly. Supreme Admiral Vex watched in horror as alarms blared throughout his ship. Sections were being destroyed by what his officers had assured him were harmless human vessels. "Retreat," he ordered. "All ships pull back and regroup." For the first time since the war began, the Valari fleet withdrew from Earth orbit. They needed time to reassess their strategy against an enemy that fought like no other they had encountered before. On Earth, people watched as the alien ships pulled away. It wasn't victory yet, but it was hope. "They'll be back," General Hayes said as he watched the ships retreat. "Yes," Wilson agreed, "but now they know we're not as primitive as they thought, and will be ready for round 2. 3 months after the war began, Earth had become a different place. Cities bore the scars of Valari attacks. Regular people had become soldiers, and the United Earth Defense Force had transformed into a powerful fighting machine that combined old and new technologies in ways the Valari still struggled to counter. Captain James Wilson, now promoted to admiral, stood in the main control room of the newly completed space defense platform. Around him, technicians prepared for humanity's boldest move yet. "Operation Thunderbolt is ready to launch, Admiral," reported Colonel Thomas Reed, who had become Wilson's second-in-command after his success with the submarine attacks. Wilson nodded. "Show me the fleet." A large screen displayed Earth's assembled space forces. 20 converted cargo ships had been fitted with railguns, simple weapons that used magnetism to fire metal projectiles at high speed. The ships looked ugly and crude compared to the sleek Valari vessels, but they were deadly effective. Behind them were another 30 ships carrying nuclear missiles specifically designed to defeat Valari shields. These weren't the elegant spacecraft from science fiction movies. They were blocky, practical vessels built for one purpose: to take the fight to the enemy. "All ships report ready, sir," Reed said. Wilson took a deep breath. "Send the order. Operation Thunderbolt begins now." Throughout, the fleet captains received their orders, engines fired, and Earth's makeshift navy moved toward the Valari fleet, which had regrouped behind the moon. On the Valari flagship, Supreme Admiral Vex received the alert. "Human vessels approaching," an officer reported. "They appear to be modified transport ships." Vex studied the images with narrowed eyes. The humans had surprised him once. He would not underestimate them again. "They've strengthened their shields," he said. "Our science division has studied their primitive weapons and recalibrated our defenses. They won't penetrate so easily this time." "Should we engage, Supreme Admiral?" asked his second-in-command. "Yes," Vex decided, "but cautiously. Send the 3rd Battle Group to intercept them." The Valari ships moved forward, their weapons ready. They had learned from their earlier defeats and had modified their sensors to detect the old-style engines and weapons the humans were using. What they didn't expect was for the humans to have adapted too. As the Valari ships approached, the human vessels suddenly changed formation. Hidden compartments opened, revealing weapons the Valari had never seen before. "What are those?" Vex demanded as the images came through. "Unknown, Supreme Admiral," his officer replied. They appear to be primitive projectile launchers, but larger than any we've encountered. The human ships fired their railguns, massive metal slugs, some weighing several tons, shot toward the Volari vessels. The aliens' shields, recalibrated to stop the smaller projectiles from earlier battles, couldn't handle the sheer mass of these new weapons. 3 Volari ships were hit directly. Their shields flared and failed, and the metal slugs tore through their hulls. "Impossible," Vex shouted. "They're using even more primitive technology." "They've increased the mass and decreased the velocity," his science officer explained. "Our new shield configurations weren't designed for such heavy objects." Vex slammed his fist on his command chair. "Recalibrate again. All ships. Adjust shields for maximum mass resistance." The Volari fleet scrambled to adapt. Their ships began to change their shield frequencies, preparing for the heavy projectiles. But Admiral Wilson had anticipated this. "Phase 2, he ordered, over the communication system. The second wave of human ships now fired their weapons. But instead of heavy slugs, they launched thousands of small metal balls, similar to shotgun pellets but designed for space combat. The tiny projectiles moved at much higher speeds than the slugs, easily penetrating the Volari shields that had just been recalibrated for heavy, slow objects. More Volari ships suffered damage as the small projectiles shredded their external systems. "They're changing tactics faster than we can adapt," Vex's second-in-command cried. Vex saw his advantage slipping away. "All ships forward. Use energy weapons at maximum power. Destroy them before they can fire again." The Volari fleet surged forward, firing their disintegration beams at the human ships. Several human vessels were hit, turning instantly to dust. But the humans had prepared for this too. The remaining ships split into smaller groups, making it harder for the Volari to target them all. And they kept changing weapons, sometimes firing heavy projectiles, sometimes light ones, sometimes at high speed, sometimes at low speed. The Volari shields couldn't be recalibrated fast enough to stop all these different attacks. Ship after ship took damage. On the space defense platform, Wilson watched the battle unfold. "They're confused," he said to Reed. "Their technology is so advanced that they never needed to develop tactical flexibility. They don't know how to handle an enemy that keeps changing approaches." "Should we launch the final phase?" Reed asked. Wilson checked the battle data one more time. The Volari flagship was now exposed, its escort ships drawn away by the human fleet's movements. "Launch final phase," Wilson ordered. 5 ships that had been hiding behind Earth's moon now powered up their engines. These vessels carried the most powerful weapons humans had ever built, modified nuclear warheads mounted on railguns. The combination allowed the warheads to bypass shields calibrated for either conventional nuclear missiles or railgun projectiles. Vex saw the new ships. Too late. "What are those? Where did they come from?" Before his officers could respond, the human ships fired. The special warhead struck the Volari flagship directly. Its shields flickered and failed. Secondary explosions ripped through the massive ship. "We've lost engine control," an officer shouted as the bridge shook violently. "Weapons offline, shields down." For the first time in his military career, Supreme Admiral Vex felt true fear. His mighty flagship, the pride of the Volari fleet, was crippled by weapons he had once laughed at. "Order all ships to protect the flagship," he commanded. "Prepare for emergency." His words were cut off as another hit rocked the ship. The lights went out, replaced by emergency lighting. Vex knew the battle was lost. "Send the surrender signal," he said quietly. Hours later, Wilson stood in what remained of the Volari flagship's bridge. Volari crew members, now prisoners, watched as human soldiers secured the ship. Supreme Admiral Vex sat in his command chair, his proud face now showing defeat. "How?" he asked as Wilson approached. "How did your primitive species defeat our advanced technology?" Wilson looked at the alien. "Commander, we never forgot our history," he replied. "While you advanced so far that you abandoned your past, we kept learning from ours. Each generation of weapons taught us something new, and we kept that knowledge." "But your weapons were so simple," Vex said. Simple doesn't mean ineffective, Wilson corrected. You thought newer always meant better. That was your mistake. 2 weeks later, representatives from Earth and the Valari Confederation met to sign a peace treaty. The terms were fair but firm. The Valari would respect Earth's boundaries. They would pay for the damage they had caused, and they would begin a technology exchange program that would benefit both species. After the ceremony, Wilson stood with Dr. Miller, looking out at the stars through a large window. Do you think they've learned their lesson? Miller asked. I hope so, Wilson replied. Not just about Earth, but about technology itself. The newest isn't always the best. Sometimes the old ways still have value. Miller nodded. That's a lesson for us too, isn't it? As we gain their technology, we shouldn't forget what got us through this war. Exactly, Wilson agreed. The best path forward isn't just chasing the newest thing. It's taking the best of the old and combining it with the best of the new. He looked at the stars again, thinking about the strange path that had led to this moment. The aliens had laughed at humanity's primitive weapons. Now those same aliens were studying those weapons with new respect. Sometimes, Wilson thought, being underestimated was the greatest advantage of all.